Since 2013, an event toasting Sir Winston's birthday has been held at the U.S. Capitol by the sitting Speaker of the House of Representatives. It was first started under John Boehner and continued by Paul Ryan and continues with Nancy Pelosi, the current Speaker of the House. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, this event has been hosted virtually for the past 2 years. Our program today will begin with recorded remarks by Speaker Pelosi, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, and Her Majesty's Ambassador to the United States, Dame Karen Pierce. We will then move to a pre-recorded conversation between myself and Katherine Carter, property curator at Chartwell, Churchill's beloved family home in England. Our conversation included questions submitted by you, the audience, ahead of time on the various items in the Chartwell collection that were given to Churchill for his birthday over the years. I promise you will enjoy this lively discussion. Please note that this entire program is being recorded and will be available to watch on the Society's YouTube page in the coming days. We will have a few minutes at the end for me to answer any questions, so please send them using the Q&A function. And also let us know where you're tuning in from around the world by using the chat function. I see a lot of people are already stating where you're from, so thank you and please continue to do so. Lastly, today's Giving Tuesday, like I'm sure many of you know. We at the Society rely on membership and donations to achieve our mission. So if you're so moved, please make a donation by going to winstonchurchill.org/donate. So sit back, relax, have a glass of Paul Roger champagne, and enjoy this program celebrating the birthday of one of history's most influential and inspiring leaders. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello. As House Speaker, it is an honor to bring greetings from the Congress to the International Churchill Society as you gather to celebrate the birthday of a towering leader in world history, Sir Winston Churchill. For more than 5 decades, ICS has been an essential force in promoting Winston Churchill's inspiring vision of democracy, freedom, and peace. And I salute Ambassador Karen Pierce, Randolph Churchill, and the entire Churchill family for your leadership in keeping alive this legendary legacy. Toasting Churchill is also a great personal honor. In my office, I have a photo of him addressing the Congress in 1941, and in it you can see my father, Congressman D'Alessandro, seated in the chamber witnessing history. And near the Speaker's office, on the first floor of the Capitol, we proudly display a bust of Churchill, a testament to his impact on our nation. With a brilliant strategic mind, he rallied Americans and indeed the world to join the fight to save democracy from the perils of fascism, from most desperate hours to a resounding victory. And with words that have stood the test of time, he offered a beacon of hope to all freedom-loving people, one that still shines to this day. Right now, we face a deadly pandemic, an accelerating climate crisis, an assault on democracy, and many other pressing challenges that will require the world to come together and act in unison. So let us channel Churchill's fearless spirit and build a brighter future for generations to come. Best wishes for a wonderful celebration. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kevin McCarthy. As anyone who has visited Congress knows well, this building is filled with statues of great men and women whose lives have shaped history. I look to these statues every day for guidance, but one statue inspires me more than any other, the bust of Winston Churchill. When people talk about Churchill, they often praise the moments when he stood alone. And it's true that in these moments, the loneliness of the wilderness years, the defiance during the Blitz, that Churchill's foresight, his eloquence, and his genius shines. When we are tempted to take the easy path, these moments inspire us to dare to take the right path. But while I often find wisdom from these times in his life, I'm most inspired by his legacy as a uniter. Because it's from this action as a great unifier that Churchill rises from the prophet to statesman. It is these moments, such as his relationship with President Roosevelt, which formed, shaped, and drove the Allies to victory, that Churchill elevated himself from a mere politician to the savior of Western civilization. More than anyone else, Winston Churchill was the 20th century indispensable man, and his statesmanship holds lessons for us in the 21st century. With your help, it will continue to instruct and inspire all who love freedom today and centuries to come. Thank you, and God bless.
Hello, and thank you to Justin Riche, the Executive Director of the International Churchill Society, for inviting me to speak at this exceptional event in honour of that great Anglo-American, Sir Winston Churchill. It's a real privilege to be here alongside the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy on what would have been Churchill's 147th birthday. Good evening, everybody. A couple of weeks after his birthday, but more importantly after the terrible attack on Pearl Harbor, Churchill invited himself to the White House to discuss the geostrategy with FDR and Eleanor. An unsought-for visit, perhaps, but one that had tremendous consequences for the war and for the Anglo-American alliance. Winston Churchill's leadership qualities were legendary. One of the greatest leaders of the 20th century, Churchill had courage, integrity, and vision. But tonight, I'd like to talk about Churchill's incredible skill as a communicator, because words are also one of the most powerful strings to a diplomat's bow. Oratory was one of the greatest weapons in Churchill's armoury. He was attuned to the value of public speaking from early in his career. In an unpublished article at the age of 22, he wrote, "Of all the talents bestowed upon men, none is so precious as the gift of oratory. He who enjoys it wields a power more durable than that of a great king." He was a master of persuasion and a skilled negotiator, one of the finest negotiators of all time. Interestingly, though, public speaking was not something that came naturally to Churchill. Early on, he spoke in a very monotonic voice, and he had a slight speech impediment. But knowing the value of the spoken word, he worked to transform himself into one of the greatest public speakers of all. A leader who recognizes his or her flaws and works to overcome them is a true inspiration to many generations. Historians widely credit Churchill with being the greatest statesman of the 20th century, having led Britain through a dark time during the Second World War to victory in 1945. But obviously he didn't do it alone. He worked hand in glove with America and the Allied nations, and we will never forget America's contribution. Next week we will help mark the 80th anniversary of that attack on Pearl Harbor that brought the US into World War II. Allied nations will gather to remember the US troops who died in that attack and those who subsequently sacrificed so much to preserve our freedom. The threats and challenges we face today are different from those Churchill faced. Earlier this month, Britain hosted world leaders at the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow. With the hopes of all future generations on their shoulders, we saw more than 100 nations form pacts and agreements to safeguard the environment. The fight isn't over, though. The unity that Churchill's leadership inspired a lifetime ago remains critical, with collaboration and partnership as vital as ever, but in new areas like technology, health, and climate. In our battle to safeguard the planet for future generations, it's worth remembering Churchill's words once more. If we are together, nothing is impossible. If we are divided, all will fail. And my particular favourite, it's no use saying we are doing our best. You've got to succeed in doing what is necessary. I want to recall as well that one of the big things that Churchill and FDR did 80 years ago was sign the Atlantic Charter that went on to form the basis for the North Atlantic Alliance. The inspiration for that charter was the need to defend freedom and liberty and the benefits it brings ordinary citizens against the authoritarian and Nazi regime that threatened to sweep across Europe. Earlier this year in June, Prime Minister Boris Johnson and President Biden endorsed a new Atlantic Charter, again putting the emphasis on open societies and freedom and liberty for all our citizens. Thank you.
Hi, Catherine. Thanks for joining me today from the United Kingdom. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much, Justin, and thank you for inviting me to take part in tonight's festivities.
Of course. So as you know, we are recording the day before Sir Winston Churchill's birthday, but I figured you and I both have champagne. I figured we'd have a quick toast to begin this great conversation we're about to have. So cheers to Churchill's birthday.
Cheers, absolutely.
Okay, so as people can see, as the audience can see, we will be discussing birthday gifts given to Churchill that are in the Chartwell collection. And I specifically wanted to speak with you about this because not only are you the property curator of Chartwell, but you have, of course, an extensive history and knowledge of all of the items in the Chartwell collection. And you presented the audience and myself with a few items ahead of time, and we've received some great questions that we'll be discussing as we go through. But this is a rather informal conversation. We are celebrating the great man's birthday, so I figure you and I would have a lot of fun going through this. So if I can ask you to begin, let's kick off with just a quick intro of the birthday of the pieces in the Chartwell collection.
Absolutely. So yes, the gifts that I'm going to be talking to you about today are part of the collection we have at Chartwell, which is in the care of the National Trust. So we are incredibly lucky at Chartwell that the contents are the beloved possessions of Winston, Clementine Churchill and their wider family. So everything you see when you visit is theirs. Now, though the collection we have there encompasses his entire life, we tend to have more objects in the latter half, so the years he was at Chartwell. So most of the gifts I'm going to be talking to you about tonight are from those latter years of his life, and particularly the big headline birthdays, so the decades are the ones where he gets the most. So for example, on his 80th birthday, Churchill received 30,000 cards and more than 900 gifts. So we're talking about a huge volume sent from all over the world. And what I'm going to do today is show you a few from very different sorts of givers, giving very different sorts of gifts, just as a sort of cross-section of the sort of thing we have at Chartwell.
Well, wonderful. And Catherine, if I can ask before we move to the first slide, so 30,000 letters, what's the likelihood that he opened every single one of them?
So believe it or not, they actually drafted in extra secretaries whenever it was one of those big milestone birthdays. And people were getting responses as late as spring, summer the following year. So they genuinely did go through all of them. It's a huge volume though, as you say, so it took a considerable amount of time, but those gifts and cards were hugely appreciated.
Yeah, incredible. I'm sure they were. So I'm gonna go to the first slide and we'll see what we have first, which is this incredible quartz from the Swiss Alps. So tell us why you chose this piece.
So this was given to Churchill for his 71st birthday. It's the first birthday he's had after the end of the Second World War. And it's at this point when the gift giving starts to sort of crank up a gear. By the time we get into 1946, 1947, he's been given so many honours and awards internationally. But this birthday in 1945 comes right after his election defeat. So he is somewhat bruised by the vote given to him by the British electorate, and therefore particularly appreciative of the gifts given that year. So this is a piece of pale smoky quartz, it's classified as, and the reason it's been chosen is that the givers are from Switzerland. It's an informal group of admirers who decide to choose a resource unique to their locality to send to Winston Churchill. To give you an idea of scale, this piece is about 14 centimetres across and about 17 centimetres tall, sorry, 7 centimetres tall. And it is really an astonishingly good quality piece. It's a matrix quartz, so it's got a number of interconnected quartz within it. It's really high quality. So the fact that it was sent to Churchill and he chose to keep it is very telling, because as well, Churchill by this point was starting to politely decline gifts in some instances because of the number coming to him. As you can imagine, Chartwell and his London residence aren't unlimited in terms of storage. So the ones he keeps and the ones that are therefore in our collection are ones that he particularly enjoyed and appreciated. And one nice thing about this as well is we have the letter, which I've shown with it in the slide, saying the reason that it is given to Winston Churchill. And they say, never in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to one man. So they are paraphrasing one of Churchill's famous wartime speeches.
I was just going to touch on that. That is remarkable that they took that speech so quickly after, just a few years after it was delivered, and you, of course, modified it. That's amazing. And so are there 5 signatures on this?
Yes, there are 5, and like I said, it's an informal group of friends. This isn't a club or an organisation. This is the start of the informal gifts that makes their way to Churchill after the war, simply out of appreciation of his wartime leadership. And in the archives at Cambridge, we have Churchill's response on file, so we know he wrote back to them. And he said, "I'm happy to accept this token of friendship and goodwill, and would be grateful if you could convey my cordial thanks to all concerned in presentation for their kind thought of me." So it's quite a modest and gentle reply from Winston Churchill. And it's also lovely that it's a bespoke reply at this time. Later on, when the gifts are in the hundreds, sometimes there are pre-printed letters, but this one gets a bespoke response.
Yeah, I believe we have one of those pre-printed letters here at the National Churchill Leadership Center. So before we move to the next slide, can I ask you a question that was submitted, I think is very germane to this first piece. So this was from Mark Sashin. He says, when Churchill celebrated his birthday at Chartwell, were these big events or were they small, intimate affairs? Do you have any sort of information on that?
So when Churchill was celebrating any occasion at Chartwell, it tended to be a smaller scale affair. For those of you who've been to Chartwell, you might recall that the dining room in which such occasions would be hosted, it doesn't have a huge banqueting table. Really, you're looking at groups of no more than sort of 10 to 12 maximum. For the big celebrations, Churchill and his wife Clementine tended to relocate temporarily to one of their London residences, either to Downing Street if he was serving office, or 28 Hyde Park Gate in the years after his retirement. So if it was a big party, it tended to be London. If it was a smaller, more intimate special gathering, that's when it'd be at Chartwell.
Right. Well, let's move on. I definitely want to get through all these. So we're moving on to, excuse me, I'm gonna click. Okay, so this is an antique silver vase, and so I'm interested, of course, on the vase on the left, but tell us about the image on the right. Was this a card? Was this a box it was delivered in?
This is the card that accompanies it. So most of the cards that were sent to Churchill for his birthday are in the archives at Churchill College at Cambridge. So there are a handful where we have the card and the gift that were sent. So that's the reason I've included this one. And I love just how everyday it is. Do you know what I mean?
It is like something you would buy like your aunt or uncle. No offense, love my aunt and uncle.
Exactly. So that's why I thought I'd include it. The vase itself is a gift from the Sir Winston Churchill Club in Denver, Colorado. And I think it's really interesting that a Sir Winston Churchill Club had formed during his lifetime. You can imagine his response to the existence of such a club whilst he was still alive. And this was sent for his 83rd birthday. So we are in the late 1950s now. He has retired from Prime Minister, but he's still serving as an MP. And it's a Victorian vase, very, very early in Queen Victoria's reign. It is silver. And as Churchill was of course, born in Queen Victoria's lifetime, and as a historian, he would have appreciated this very fine quality vase and its craftsmanship involved.
Speaking of the groups that sprung up, during his life, of course, the International Church Society was created a couple years after his death. Yeah, I would be curious to know if there's any sort of reactions from him, whether it be in the archives or whatever, to whether it be that informal group of friends who sent the quartz from the Swiss Alps, or these people. It would be interesting to see his reaction to some sort of reverence in a formal group while still alive.
Well, we know how Churchill replied to the Sir Winston Churchill Club in Denver, because again, the Churchill archives reply letter. But what I would say before that is the gifting of it's really interesting, because a huge amount of thought goes into the size of the vase to send. And there's actually back and forth letters about the fact that they are very aware that Churchill, by this point in the late 50s, is getting a lot of gifts. And so it is sent with reassurance that the base is no more than 6 inches in diameter. They're literally thinking about how much sort of square footage he has at his home, because they're aware by this point he is no longer holding office. He is mostly at Chartwell or at 28 Hyde Park Gate. So they are very careful to pick something with very small square inchage, I should say, along the bottom. In terms of the reply, Churchill writes, "Would you please convey to the members of your club my very warm thanks for the beautiful silver vase you so kindly sent to me. I am indeed glad to have it in my possession, and your thought of me has given me much pleasure." So,
what a wonderful reply.
It is, and again, it's a bespoke reply. So these tend to be the things that he was particularly touched by, if you got a reply that was clearly as a result of that particular gift.
Wonderful. So moving on, this is a Walnut Cigar Box. So if I can say, Churchill loves smoked cigars, cigar boxes, it seems like something he would like. Tell us more about this piece.
So if you didn't know Winston Churchill personally and you wanted to give him something that he would almost certainly be appreciative of, cigars do feel like something that would be low-hanging fruit in terms of choosing what to give him. So this is a cigar box that was given by the students of Harrow School to Winston Churchill.
Oh, wonderful. His alma mater.
Yes, absolutely. So it is his 80th birthday gift from his former school. And what this cigar box would do, its function is that you can put your cigars in it and it will keep them at the right humidity so they won't go too dry or spoil. So it is a safeguarding mechanism for your cigars. And Churchill goes back to Harrow every year for the Harrow songs. And so there's one on the 12th of November in 1954. And whilst he is there for that event, he is presented with this cigar box from the students of Harrow School. In the speech that he makes whilst attending that event earlier in November, he says, "Make quite sure you do not bring politics into private life. You must not let the ordinary flow and ebb of political affairs interfere with loyalty and friendship." So a nice message that he is conveying there after so long having served in the House of Commons. So one thing as well to be aware of is that the Song of Harrow is 40 years on. And for this occasion, they write an extra verse for Winston Churchill, which you can imagine, having had such a connection with Harrow for so long, this is his 15th time of attending the Harrow songs in a row. The adding of an extra verse for him especially would have been hugely appreciative. And I have the words of that verse, if you might be interested.
Please do.
Okay, it is: 60 years on, though in time growing older, younger at heart you return to the hill. You who in days of defeat ever bolder, led us to victory, serve Britain still. Still there are bases to guard or beleaguer, still must the battle for freedom be won. Long may you fight, sir, who fearless and eager look back today more than 60 years on. And so that verse was made especially for that occasion on the same day that this lovely cigar box was given to Churchill.
Well, that's incredibly touching. My goodness. So actually, I'm glad we're here because I'd like to ask a question. This is from Jim Wilson. He says, Catherine, in your opinion, what may be the range of sentiments or symbolisms expressed by some of these gifts beyond happy birthday?
Well, I think that the other question in relation to this box is very telling. I think that particularly the 80th birthday, that's the real big one that a lot of these gifts come from. It's the first major milestone after the end of the Second World War. So there's also a fitting moment in time to show appreciation for his wartime leadership as well. So ultimately, I think birthdays from 1945 onwards start to have woven into them this huge sense of international gratitude to him. But of course, as with everyone, a birthday is a nice moment in time just to acknowledge and to celebrate everything you have achieved.
Yeah, I think to your point, this this box from Harrow School is such a survey of his life in a sense, and that sort of sentiment, that nostalgic yet still present feeling is very strong. I mean, that's what I got from this. So let's move on to our next item. Okay, so this is must be a sketch of Churchill speaking in the House of Commons by Edward Agrizzone, which, excuse my Italian. Tell us why you chose this piece.
Yes, so this is a painting that was commissioned by the Parliamentary Press Gallery. So essentially,
okay,
to serve the House of Commons. And it was given, again, it's another one of the 80th birthday gifts, but it really stands out in Chartwell's collection. We don't have many images like this. The medium is it's pen and black ink, and it's got watercolor as well. So most of the paintings at Chartwell, particularly because it's so dominated by Churchill's own paintings, are oil paintings, and so they're very heavy brushwork and really, really bright, bold colors. So this painting is almost the opposite of that. But the reason that Churchill loved it so much is because it is positioning him as being in command of Commons. So you can see he has complete control over what's going on. But at the same time, it's quite an informal composition. So Agrizzone is previously a war artist, and the press gallery have gone to the Tate's director and said, who do you think would be the right person for a gift for Churchill's 80th birthday? And so Agrizzone is chosen because of his informal and slightly different style to what they imagined a lot of other people would be giving Churchill for his 80th birthday, which would be much more formal compositions. And so it's just a lovely thing to have, to show Churchill there in the House of Commons in full command, and that's why he liked it so much.
It's very moving. Forgive me if you already said this, but does this depict any sort of specific speech, or is this really just evoking leading the Commons, as a general metaphor, if you will?
It's not thought to represent a particular speech or a particular moment. It is, it's painted, well, the sketches are done from life. Yeah. So is there, as in Agrizzone gets access to the press gallery. They want to depict the particular angle that the journalists get to see, so that Churchill could see how he's seen through their eyes. So he paints or sketches from life, but it isn't intended to represent a particular date or particular speech.
So tell me your thoughts on this, but is to Churchill's left, to his own left, that must be Anthony Eden, and then to his right, is that Clement Attlee?
No, so Attlee would be sat on the other side.
Okay. Oh, of course. Duh. Goodness, it must be the Paul Roger,
Exactly. We'll say it's that. But yeah, the front bench as was the case.
Of course.
Yeah, but it's and to this date it hangs at Chartwell. It's part of the main display. If you were on your way to Lady Churchill's bedroom, it hangs in that corridor. And part of the reason for that is because watercolours are very at risk of light damage and very at risk of fading unless you keep them away from natural light. So it has retained its colour in large part thanks to the care of the National Trust and making sure that it is protected from light as much as is possible.
I'm going to insert a question here. This is from Joe Oliver, who's a friend of the Society, former fellowship recipient at the Churchill Leadership Center. He says, question for Katherine. In some of their letters, Winston and Clementine talk of setting up a museum room at Chartwell to display all of the many gifts Churchill has received. Do you know anything about their thoughts about preserving Chartwell during their own lives? And did this museum room, ever come into being?
Really good question. So, as some of your viewers may be aware, the National Trust was given Chartwell in early 1947 because Chartwell had been bought for the Churchills by a group of admirers who immediately gave to the National Trust on condition that the Churchills could live out the rest of their lives there. So technically, Chartwell has actually been owned by the National Trust since the 1940s. And as a result of that, there was a 20-year process where the Churchills working hand in glove with the National Trust about how it would be displayed to the public one day. And the plan for a museum is an interesting part of that, because at one point the idea was it would be a freestanding building. There's architectural drawings done in the late 40s with the idea
wow.
to be a separate building. The plan seems to have changed over time, because now what you find when you visit Chartwell is the museum room is within the house itself. So it is a space that was originally a guest bedroom and a bathroom that sort of got knocked through. And that is the space where, to this date, we have displayed some of the most iconic objects in our collection, which among them include crystal bowls from Stalin. There's Churchill's Nobel Prize in there. So really phenomenal objects of international importance. And so they are in the museum room at Chartwell.
Katherine, the next piece in your presentation is the House of Commons 80th birthday book. This looks like a lovely book, really well done. Tell us more about it, please.
So this book is, first of all, hugely important because it is a gift given by all members of the House of Commons. It's particularly interesting, though, because as some of the people watching tonight might be aware, it is one part of a two-part gift given by the President of Parliament for his 80th birthday. So for anyone who's watched The Crown, for example, you might be familiar that there was a painting by the artist Graham Sutherland that was also given as part of this big event held in Westminster Hall on Churchill's 80th birthday. Now, the painting does not survive to this day. It was revealed in Lady Solmes's biography of her mother, Clementine, that the painting was in fact destroyed some years after it was given, not by any members of the family, but by members of the supporting staff at Chartwell. And so this book, however, is therefore the bit that Churchill actually liked of the two-part gift.
Yeah, that painting is certainly iconic in maybe infamously iconic. But it's so looking at the photo of the hands holding the book, this is a rather large piece.
Yes, it is. It is sizable. In order to hold the signatures of so many individuals, it is a large presentation volume, and it's exquisitely produced. The green outside binding, for example, that's by a company called Sangorski and Sutcliffe, who other commissions include, for example, the coronation documents. So, these are, royal patronage levels of suppliers, you could say. And the response from Churchill to this is really, really lovely, actually. So the speech that he made upon receiving the book in particular, he says, "There has not been anything like it in British history. And indeed, I doubt whether any of the modern democracies has shown such a degree of kindness and generosity to a party politician who has not yet retired and may at any time be involved in controversy." So it's very Churchill, it's very tongue-in-cheek. He's not done yet, but he is nonetheless hugely grateful for the gesture and the symbolism of this being given to him.
Of course, and that tongue-in-cheek response that he gave to the Sutherland portrait, a great example of modern art.
Well, just out of interest, what do you think of that painting? I'm sure you've seen the footage of him in Westminster. Paul?
I mean, I can understand his surprise for sure. It's an incredibly deep painting in my eyes. It's it captures many different types of facets of who I think he was. But at the same time, it's such a personal piece. I can see why he wouldn't like it, and I can see why they wouldn't want to display it publicly or even in their home. And then, but maybe it just boils down to he just thought it was not a very good piece and didn't want it. I mean, so I don't, of course, can't speak for him, but I thought it was incredibly deep. That's not to say I found it aesthetically pleasing. I don't think I did, but I do think it gets a slightly, a slightly bad rap. So that's my opinion. What about you? What do you think?
So my opinion of the Sutherland portrait is essentially, it's just like Sutherland doesn't read the room. It's an 80th birthday gift that is entirely intended to celebrate someone and their achievements. And what Sutherland does is he executes his artistic interpretation of the subject sat in front of him, which I think personally isn't what he should have done in the context of the commission that was given to him. And dare I say it, Churchill in his latter years by that point, dare I say it, possibly it was just a little bit too honest, one could argue, for something that is intended as a celebratory gift. That's my interpretation. I
would completely agree with that interpretation. Well, let's move to, so let's move to this handwritten quotation lines. So the quote is from Abraham Lincoln, American president, with the text, handwritten text by President Franklin Roosevelt. Tell us about how this gift came into. I see it's on loan to Chartwell from the Churchill family. Just tell us more about this gift.
So, as you say, it's on loan to us from the Churchill family, and so our sincere thanks to the family for the ongoing support and kindness to Chartwell and the National Trust. This gift was given to Churchill for his 70th birthday, so it's in 1944, so the Second World War is still raging at this point. And it is sent to Churchill by FDR with an accompanying telegram which reads, "Ever so many happy returns of the day. I shall never forget the party with you and UJ," by which he means Uncle Joe, so that's Stalin, "a year ago, and we must have more of them that are even better. Affectionate regards, FDR." So that's a reference to the previous birthday when they'd all been together at the Tehran conference. This is almost certainly the last gift ever given by FDR to Winston Churchill, as sadly Roosevelt passed away the following year. And it's really interesting that he has chosen this as a gift, knowing, for example, that Churchill is half American, knowing that he's a historian. These kind of connections to great leaders of the past is something that FDR could have been very comfortable in the knowledge that Winston Churchill would know of and appreciate. We also have Churchill's reply to this, if you'd be interested. So his reply reads, "I'm deeply grateful to you for your most kind message on my birthday, which gave me the greatest pleasure, and also for the framed quotation from Abraham Lincoln with your charming note upon it. This reached me by sure hands when I awoke. I cannot tell you how much I value your friendship, or how much I hope upon it for the future of the world, should we both be spared." So it is worth contextualizing that, as I said, we're still in the midst of the Second World War at this point. Victory has not yet been declared for Britain and our allies. So there's still a huge reliance on these international relationships for the conduct of war. So it's a really important moment in the Second World War, as well as signifying that special relationship between the UK and the US.
How remarkable is that FDR referred to Stalin as UJ? Even in a personal gift, in a personal letter, that's a remarkable thing.
I think it goes to show the informality, actually, between the heads of government at that point in time, they had to be very frank and honest and open with each other in order to execute the war as it was. So, as you say, it's very telling that they use almost nicknames for each other.
Well, our next item is the Japanese Lacquer Box. How did this come into your collection?
So this is one of the very last gifts that we have in Charles' collection, because it was given to Churchill for his 90th birthday in 1964. Wow. So he passed away just over a month later. And it's given to him by former Prime Minister of Japan, Prime Minister Yoshida, who has held office twice in the years since the Second World War, his second premiership of which coincides with Winston Churchill's second premiership in the UK. So the pair had met, they conducted diplomacy. Yoshida had come to the UK for a diplomatic visit 10 years earlier in 1954. But by this point, both are long out of office. So this is a much more personal gift from one former serving politician to another.
Fascinating. So on his 90th birthday, is there anything that survives in terms of what was celebrated, you know, how it was celebrated?
So the Churchill, yeah, so the Churchills went to London for his 90th birthday, which meant that when they left Chartwell in late October 1964, they had no idea that that would be the last time they as a couple would leave their beloved home in Kent. So they then move across to their London home, 28 Hyde Park Gate. There isn't really a big celebration by that point. As you can imagine, Churchill is 90 at that point, so you don't see anything on the scale of the 80th birthday celebrations 10 years earlier. So it is largely friends and family around him for that 90th birthday.
So our next item is this butterfly haunts. What is this, Catherine?
So I thought I'd throw this one in there, juxtapose some of those big, heavy-hitting gifts from, you know, heads of government or, you know, really sort of symbolic post-war celebrations to something much more, dare I say it, relatable for most of us. So L. Hugh Newman, who's just known as Hugh, was Churchill's butterfly supplier after the Second World War. He was
no, we all have one of those, right? Don't we?
Exactly. So Churchill had a lifelong love of butterflies, started when he was a schoolboy. He then continued the interest in his years as a subaltern with the 4th Hussars in India, and then resurrected his hobby in the years after the Second World War. So in 1946, Churchill invites Newman to Chartwell to survey the potential resources and opportunities for butterfly breeding. There is a structure in the garden that's converted into a butterfly house, and Newman advises on different plants to plant in proximity to draw butterflies. And so this is a gift given 2 years later in 1948, and it's just got this lovely handwritten note just saying, "May there be many butterflies at Chartwell next summer." So it just shows the softer side of Winston Churchill.
Yes. Yeah, it shows the not just the informal, but the ability of him to, you know, have such connections with everyday people, whether it be the butterfly man or the bricklayer. That is certainly something that endures throughout his life and his personality, and this certainly captures that.
You're absolutely right, and even the fact that this is a book he kept. So we have a sizable collection of books at Chartwell, which includes a group of around 900, which are called the Inscribed Books collection. And for anyone who might recall, in 2016, the National Trust launched a fundraising campaign to buy a number of objects that had been on long-term loan to Chartwell. That included the Inscribed Books collection, and it is following the successful fundraising for that we've been able to keep this and all those other books from friends, from family, from well-wishers, whoever it may be, to enable us to continue to tell these stories at Churchill's home.
Wonderful. Well, we'll move to this, The Pageant of the Century by Henry White.
So this is a very different book. This is a pictorial history book, and dare I say it, it's not a very Churchill book. This is around the time of the rise of photojournalism in the 1930s. And for those of you who are familiar with the sorts of histories that Churchill reads, they tend to be very heavy, dense text. So this one strikes me as one of those gifts where it says more about the giver and what they would like.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure all of us have been guilty of at one point or another.
Of course.
This is a gift from Churchill's sister-in-law. So this is from Nellie. This is from Clementine's sister. And it's another 80th birthday gift. And it's an interesting choice because it's been given in the 50s, but this is a book that was published 20 years earlier in 1934. So it is published at the point when Churchill is in a political wilderness. But even having said that, the references to Churchill in this book are very complimentary. So, for example, this page that I've opened it on to show you here, it's talking about how the cabinet at the outset of the First World War was split in terms of those who wanted to pursue peace and those who wanted to prosecute war. And the quote about Churchill reads, "The war party centred around Mr. Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty, who had been in service in South Africa and had the type of vision and imagination possessed by great commanders throughout history." So even though at this point, when the book's published, people might have thought Churchill's political career was past its height, it's still referencing him in a very high tone. And also there's this lovely poem that Clementine's written with the description, which, just in case anyone can't quite make it out, it reads as follows: "Rarely can mankind say thank you to those who live. So on this blessed day, to you our hearts we give. Knowing the stars decline, knowing the sun must set, God, hear this cry of mine, don't leave us, not yet, not yet." And I've searched for this poem, I can't find it anywhere, so I think it is Nellie's own composition. And given their very, very long-standing relationship, Winston married Nellie's sister almost half a century earlier, so they have known each other for a huge percentage of their lives. So it's interesting that she's chosen a history book from the 30s to give as an 80th birthday gift.
Yeah, it's fascinating. That photo of him, he looks so young. It looks like Nellie, one of those classic gifts we've all done. Hey, I love this book. I think you'd like it too. So
exactly. Have that tone. It doesn't sit with any of the other sorts of histories that we have at Chartwell. So I think it's probably that. But bless her, she's picked one where at least it's referencing him in a very complimentary way. Of course.
And I'm sure he enjoyed that. So we'll move to the last piece, which is this silver ashtray. And this must have been given by a grandchild.
It's given by all of the grandchildren combined.
Oh, wonderful.
So it's a shared gift. And the reason I've ended on this one is because sometimes, dare I say it, it's not the showiest things that mean most to people, it's the most heartfelt. Don't get me wrong, this is ashtray, so it's a very good quality ashtray. But as you might be able to see from the photograph where it's held on its side, it's actually got the names of each of the grandchildren. It's sort of etched onto it.
Oh, yes.
And their Soames.
That's lovely.
They carry on around the edge. And this isn't something that is away in our stores. When the Churchills were deciding what should be shown where in terms of the public display, during that 20-year period of planning, as I mentioned, the decision was made to put this on the desk in the study. So arguably at the absolute epicenter of Winston's life at Chartwell is this lovely gift from his grandchildren.
That is very lovely. I completely agree. Well, Katherine, I really enjoyed, I know our audience really enjoyed this birthday treat. If I can ask you, and I'm just going to stop my screen because I just have one or two more questions from the audience we'd love to have your answers to, specifically about Chartwell. This comes from Frank Ward. at New Mexico State University. And this is a playful question. I know you enjoy it. Did Churchill have his pats declawed, or did he leave them with their long, sharp claws?
Well, I can tell you from evidence that remains at Chartwell to this day, they definitely had claws. Although we as the National Trust, our efforts are of course to preserve the Churchill's belongings and possessions, that means doing so in the way in which they knew them. And so, for example, the sofas in the drawing room at Chartwell do have cat claw marks on them, and so they remain there as a depiction of their life at Chartwell. So they definitely have claws.
Yeah, I would think that they would keep the claws on. I know at least the most recent jocks are both in and out cats, so outdoors and indoors. This last question's from Maury Kleinbart. He says, I'd be curious to know how Churchill treated his own children's birthday. Do you have anything in the collection or that you know of regarding birthday celebrations for his own children, whether it be at Chartwell? I know many of them were older at that time. Any answer you can give for Maury?
So we don't have much in the way of gifts to the children from Winston and Clementine, because the collection at Chartwell primarily reflects Winston and Clementine's own rather than things they gave to other people. Just thinking about some of the letters I've read in the archives, there are references at times to Clementine having bought things and telling Winston, just so you know, this is what you're giving Mary this year.
And we've all been there.
Yeah. So understandably, given how busy Churchill was, from writing books to painting to holding almost every major office of state, there were occasions where the gifting was sort of outsourced to Clementine. So, but he was always informed of what they were, and things were given with much ceremony.
Amazing. Well, Katherine, thank you for this really great time. As always, thank you for everything you do for Chartwell and also the Churchill heritage and legacy. And wishing you a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you, Justin. You too.
Well, thank you all for watching that presentation. We do have a few minutes left, so I've seen quite a few questions come in, and I'm going to try to answer these as quickly as possible. But I first want to say thank you to Katherine Carter and everything that her and her team at Chartwell do to promote the legacy of Sir Winston and his family at that wonderful, wonderful home. So a few quick questions. Moss asks, how much help and influence did Winston's brother Jack have on Winston during his life, particularly during World War II and his wilderness years? They were very close brothers. They had a great relationship. They fought together in the Boer War when they were both, I believe, at the Battle of Spine Kop. So they had a very close relationship indeed. And he was also close with his in-laws, his brother's wife and family. Rogerio Souza says, it looks like Churchill had the sense of history during all of his life. Do you know if he was worried to store and keep all things, documents, personal data that could serve to show his own life in the future? Well, Rogerio, yes, I'd say so. And that's a testament in the fact that his entire political and personal archive, letters, speeches, notes are at Churchill Archive Center at Churchill College, Cambridge. And then, of course, the collections at Chartwell. But then, of course, the existing family members have many things handed down through their generations. Tom Long asks, I'm fascinated by the mention of his residence at 28 Hyde Park Gate. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Yeah, Tom. So this was purchased in 1945 after he left office, and he owned it until his death in 1965. He actually died in the home in January 1965. And recently in 2016, it was listed for sale for I think 23 million pounds. So pretty good price at that point now. Chris Piper asked, who owns Chartwell? It's owned by the National Trust. That, as Katherine talked about in her presentation, that was part of the agreement that Churchill made with the National Trust to keep the home as it was after his death and his wife Clementine's death. And then the last question that I can answer, this is from Luis, how many humidors did Winston Churchill have to keep all of his cigars? Luis, I don't know the answer. I would think it's many, many. So thank you all for joining us, joining me for this conversation, celebrate the birthday of Sir Winston Churchill. Again, please continue to have some glasses of Paul Roger to celebrate. Wishing you all a wonderful and merry holiday season. Thank you and take care.